You probably didn't notice it at first. The coffee at your neighborhood cafe became cheap and watered down. A medium coffee went from $3.50 to $5 overnight, and wait times increased without explanation. At your local diner, portions seemed to shrink overnight, while the friendly service became corporate and uninviting. Meanwhile, at your family doctor, instead of seeing your GP in a day or two, wait times shot up to weeks. And when you finally arrived, you were met by a rushed, indifferent physician's assistant, pushing costly treatments before shuffling you out the door. More and more, everyday interactions began feeling cold, impersonal, and calculated. Surely these things couldn't be connected, right? Actually, they are. You're not imagining it. What you're experiencing is the creeping commoditization of daily life, brought to you by private equity. Operating mostly in the shadows, private equity firms have been on a buying spree. In 2023, global PE deal volume hit an already staggering $1.3 trillion. By 2024, it had soared to $1.7 trillion. And because these firms go to great lengths to obscure their ownership, they can quietly corner entire industries before anyone even realizes what's happening. And it's not just coffee shops and diners either. Veterinary clinics, hospitals, nursing homes, doctors and dentists' office, skilled trades businesses, trailer parks, even prisons have become prime targets. Once acquired, the same ruthless playbook gets rolled out. Slash costs, strip productive assets, gouge prices, and use market dominance to monopolize and price fix. But it's even worse than that. The aim isn't long-term growth or sustainability. It's to squeeze out maximum short-term profit, dress the business up on paper, then turn around and flip it to the next sucker. So how have private equity firms pulled this off? How have vulture capitalists financialized nearly every aspect of daily life? And why does private equity ruin everything it touches? Before we can explain why private equity ruins everything, we need to understand how it works. In common usage, it refers to private investment funds, groups of wealthy investors who pool their funds to purchase companies. They target companies they believe can be made more valuable and then sell them for a profit. The key to this definition is the three words, made more valuable. In practice, this means mass layoffs, offshoring jobs, cutting every corner imaginable under the guise of streamlining, and selling off productive assets piece by piece, all to boost returns for investors. Think of it like the difference between a homeowner and a house flipper. A homeowner invests in durable appliances, solid roofing, and quality fixtures because they plan to live there. Every improvement is judged by one question. Will this make my home a better place for me and my family to live? A house flipper, on the other hand, spends the bare minimum to create the appearance of quality. Their only question is, will this increase my bottom line or not? They don't care if the roof leaks or the foundation crumbles 5 years down the line. By then, they've long since cashed out and moved on. Private equity works the same way. Even Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's legendary partner and hardly a critic of capitalism, stated, "All they're doing is lying a little bit to make the money come in." One of the most insidious aspects of private equity's playbook is its usage of debt. PE firms acquire companies through something known as a leveraged buyout. Normally, if you want to buy a company, you need cash, but private equity doesn't like using its own money. After all, why risk your own money when you can risk someone else's? Instead, they put up a small fraction of the purchase price, usually around 10%, and borrow the remaining 90%. But here's the trick. That debt doesn't go on the books of the private equity firm. It gets dumped onto the company they just bought, instantly saddling it with a massive financial burden. The PE firm, now the owner, controls the company but shields itself from the debt. To keep the business afloat long enough to extract value, they squeeze it for every possible dollar, selling off land, buildings, warehouses, and anything that isn't nailed down, often to subsidiaries they also own. And that's before they start paying themselves huge management fees, bonuses, and even rent on the properties they stripped away. Unsurprisingly, many of these companies don't survive this financial equivalent of a mafia-style bust-out. Take Red Lobster, for example. In May 2014, San Francisco-based firm Golden Gate Capital bought the chain for $2.1 billion. To finance the deal, they used something called a sale-leaseback agreement, selling off Red Lobster's real estate for $1.5 billion, and then renting it back to the company. Red Lobster was suddenly on the hook for $200 million a year in rent, about 10% of its total revenue, with the rent increasing 2% annually. Saddled by massive debt it could never realistically pay off, Red Lobster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and was sold off again to another round of private equity firms in 2024. This 80s-style corporate raiding had real-world consequences. Over 100 restaurant locations closed, thousands of jobs disappeared, and another American chain was cannibalized. Golden Gate Capital, meanwhile, made off like bandits, with estimates putting their gain from the deal at $400 million. This case shows the massive gap between how private equity sells itself and how it actually operates. In theory, the pitch sounds reasonable. Buy underperforming companies, fix inefficiencies, streamline operations, and create value. However, the reality is never that neat. In practice, the only goal is to boost short-term numbers until the firm can exit with a profit. That means anything goes. Asset stripping, layoffs, debt loading, looting, pillaging, whatever makes the books look good today, no matter the cost tomorrow. And now we get to the newest trick in the PE playbook, the roll-up. Not satisfied with pumping and dumping publicly traded companies, private equity firms have increasingly turned their focus to small and medium-sized businesses. The strategy is simple. Buy dozens of companies in the same industry and merge or roll them up into a single larger entity. This new company, having bought out most of the competition, can then jack up the prices for goods and services, slash wages for employees, cut healthcare and retirement benefits, and reduce investment in innovation. Industries targeted for roll-ups tend to share certain traits: steady cash flow, proven business models, low risk of technological disruption, and, most importantly, lots of small players. Many of these businesses are family-run, passed down from one generation to the next. Think medical and dental practices, funeral homes, accounting and law practices, skilled trades like HVAC, plumbing, and electrical work. If this sounds suspiciously like a monopoly, that's because it is. It's the same approach J.D. Rockefeller used to build Standard Oil, the most notorious monopoly in US history. The difference? Rockefeller's empire was eventually dismantled by antitrust action. Modern private equity roll-ups, however, often slip through the cracks. Because each acquisition is relatively small, they often fall below the dollar thresholds that trigger federal scrutiny. The result is alarming. One of the cornerstones of the American dream, the family business, is being systematically dismantled and rolled into soulless, profit-obsessed sweatshops. Small businesses have always been about more than just money. Yes, they need to make a profit to survive, but they also carry legacies, serve their communities, and value long-term relationships. They understand that treating employees fairly is key to enduring success. Private equity doesn't care about any of that. To them, family businesses aren't institutions worth preserving. They're just another asset to be stripped and flipped. PE-run businesses operate like hollowed-out shells of their former selves, gutting benefits and pensions, grinding employees into the ground, and fleecing customers. Reputation and community be damned. Remember, private equity isn't in it for the long haul. They're financial house flippers, only interested in the quick flip and nothing more. One particularly egregious case was ManorCare, a nursing home chain purchased by the Carlyle Group, one of the largest private equity firms in the world. After the acquisition, conditions spiraled into horror. By 2018, health code violations skyrocketed. Residents were left sitting in their own filth. Rooms were crawling with roaches and ants. Chronic understaffing led to overdoses, broken bones, brain hemorrhages, even deaths. Michel Maldonado, whose father lived in a ManorCare facility in 2017, described the conditions. One time we came in to visit him and he was sitting there in a wheelchair naked, with just a blanket on him. No pants, no underpants. He got bed sores, infections, and he had a couple falls. It was like they would never check on him. Multiple lawsuits followed, but the Carlyle Group managed to get them dismissed or struck down, walking away scot-free. And despite ManorCare's colossal failure, the Carlyle Group walked away with a fortune. They sold off the company's real estate in 2011 for $6.1 billion, nearly the same as the $6.3 billion they had paid for the entire company in 2007. On top of that, they pocketed $472 million a year in rent through a leaseback scheme, plus $80 million in advisory and deal fees. Their total haul easily reached into the hundreds of millions, possibly over $1 billion. The financialization of healthcare has been catastrophic for ordinary Americans. Patients suffer, families suffer, communities suffer. And the worst part, this isn't just happening in the shadows. It's happening with the blessing and active support of multiple branches of government. Support for private equity comes from every corner of the political spectrum. In fact, it may be the only truly bipartisan issue in Washington, D.C. And it's not hard to see why. Judges, senators, congressmen, and high-ranking military officers are all on the take, with many accepting cushy, high-paying jobs at PE firms when their political careers end. Timothy Geithner, the former Treasury Secretary under President Obama, is now chairman of Warburg Pincus. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, is now a strategic partner at JAM Capital. Paul Ryan, another former speaker, is now a partner at Solomir Capital. David Petraeus, former CIA director and four-star general, is now chairman of KKR Global Institute. And the list goes on. A veritable who's who of Washington power players, now filling their pockets with private equity plunder. Since 1990, the industry has given over $900 million to congressional candidates and members. So the question becomes, what does private equity get in return for all these bribes? Like any other lobby group, they buy themselves preferential treatment. For years, private equity firms successfully fought to keep surprise medical billing legal, even as patients were bankrupted by it. They've also successfully dodged stricter regulatory standards and the reporting requirements that public companies must follow. But the crown jewel of all their lobbying is a tax provision known as the carried interest loophole. This provision allows private equity firms to classify their performance earnings as capital gains instead of ordinary income. That means their profits are taxed at around 20%, rather than the 37% top rate for ordinary income. This tax loophole provides enormous benefits to the PE industry. While the exact numbers are impossible to determine, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that treating carried interest like ordinary income would boost tax revenue by about $100 billion over the next decade. And yet, despite pledges from Presidents Obama, Trump, and Biden to shut it down, every attempt has been quashed by private equity's allies in Congress. Not only has the loophole survived for nearly 20 years, it's gotten even better. During the Biden years, PE firms secured an exemption under the Inflation Reduction Act. Companies owned by the same private equity investor would not be considered together when calculating the 15% corporate minimum tax. Private equity doesn't just dodge taxes. They've managed to rewrite the rules to profit even more. And with near universal political backing, private equity's financial coup shows no signs of ending anytime soon. The financialization of housing, healthcare, and small business has turned daily life into a rigged game, designed to squeeze as much money as possible from what is rapidly becoming a new peasant class. If left unchecked, industry roll-ups will continue to eliminate pathways that allowed enterprising individuals to climb into the middle class. And with the increasing financialization of the housing market, the dream of home ownership is rapidly becoming a fantasy for millions of working families. Without the ability to buy a home, build a successful family business, or improve one's station in life, social mobility collapses. What's left is a rigidly stratified society, a tiny class of haves and a vast underclass of have-nots. This kind of inequality has long been associated with Latin America, where wealth remains locked in the hands of a small elite, descendants of colonial landlords and resource barons. But in America, this stratification isn't the legacy of centuries-old conquest. It's happening right now, in real time, engineered by private equity's relentless looting of the economy. The story of private equity isn't just about businesses being stripped, jobs being lost, or communities being gutted. It's about the dismantling of the very foundations of the middle class and the quiet transformation of a once thriving society into something colder, harsher, and far less free. All is not lost though. Public awareness is growing, and with awareness comes pressure. Pressure to close tax loopholes, enforce antitrust laws, and protect small businesses. Private equity relies on secrecy. Its looting only works so long as the public remains unaware. That day is rapidly coming to an end. Even President Trump, typically hands-off on financial regulation, has voiced particular disdain for the carried interest loophole, supporting a group of Democratic senators pushing a bill called the Carried Interest Fairness Act. Whether the bill ultimately passes remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: the desire for reform is in the air. Sooner or later, the era of private equity's unfettered looting will come to an end. Because in the end, private equity doesn't just ruin companies, it ruins lives. And if nothing changes, it will ruin us all. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and watching one of these 2 videos next.